Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevičius. Welcome to episode number 30 of Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. Today is Sunday, February 21st, 2016. And today's guest is Joris Verdin, organist, musicologist, and composer from Belgium. He teaches organ at the Royal Conservatory of Antwerp and is professor of organology at the University of Leuven, Belgium. He has recorded over 40 CDs as a soloist, spanning many musical eras and styles. His main areas of interest are 19th century French organ and harmonium school. In this conversation, Professor Verdin shares his revolutionary insights about performance practice issues in the organ works of Cesar Franck. Let's go to the show. So, Joris, I'm so delighted that you're joining this conversation. You're so generous with your work in organ world and with your talent and your insights. Thank you so much for doing this and welcome to the show.
Well, I thank you, and you are way too kind to me. It's just a pleasure to talk about things we both love and like to talk about.
That's exactly right. Today we're going to talk about something that is very, very special to me and to you also, Cesar Franck and his performance practice. Because, Joris, you have some really revolutionary ideas in your head. At least you had when I first met you in 2000 in Sweden, in Gothenburg. Remember, you played this double recital in the Artistan, in the concert hall there. I think it was this instrument inspired by Cavaillé, and you played many French works, and Vidor and Franck, for that matter. But we were, the audience were spellbound, basically about your tempi, right? Your performance, other issues. But at that time it was, I think, very, very new idea, but we will talk about that. Is it new today? Is it mainstream? What do you think?
Well, I must say, when you say revolutionary and it was new, I think maybe as to the situation, it was maybe not what we were used to. But so that's my point. I'm convinced that what I'm doing, which is based upon historical sources, I mean, really sources from the time Franck was living. So then it's difficult to say it's a revolution, because I'm trying to come again to what could have been a kind of performance at those days. So, and it's absolutely true what you say, that I really upset many people with those ideas. But and it's more now, like you say, it's some time I'm doing this. Well, I mean, not upsetting people, but I mean, working on Franck and tempi. And I'm really more and more convinced about the fact that the way of playing or performing Franck's music has changed throughout the 20th century so much that the image that we have today is probably not at all the way it was done.
Exactly.
Now 150 years ago almost. So and I must say I did some extra research on it, and I can, as far as I know, I don't find any source that contradicts this idea that Cesar Franck was not this special composer which you don't play if you are not over 40 and things like that, you know. Mm-hmm. This idea of the Pater Seraphicus, of course, he must have been a very kind and gentle person. That's absolutely true. But it was already Alfred Cortot in the 1920s who said probably the image of Cesar Franck we are cultivating now is not at all the way he was and the way he played and so on and so forth. So for myself, I have enough arguments to do what I like to do. And the music by Franck is just excellent music. And it doesn't depend so much on the tempo if the performance is okay. But the thing is, when I was studying at conservatory, this Holy Franck tradition was very, very strong. And as, of course, we are very close to Paris. Yeah. So we were very much under this influence. And I remember very well when I was told, yeah, but Franck, it's a special composer. You have to play it slowly. Every chord should be heard. And the harmony is so important, and etc., etc. And his music is celestial music. Then there was something inside that said, I don't believe this, that it's all only, and it has so much impact, especially on tempo and the way you approach this music. So, on the other hand, there are other people who now say, yeah, but I don't feel the music by Franck just so fast. For me, it's slower music, it's quiet music. It's perfectly fine with me. So there are many ways of doing so, but I think we are now at the time, so the 19th century is more than 100 years ago. So it's actually ancient music. And ancient music, we have this approach that we go to the sources and we try to inform ourselves and see what can I do with those sources. And thus far, I didn't find any source, I mean contemporary source of Franck's lifetime, that proves that he played slowly, for instance, and that he was not a virtuoso. On the contrary, when you find reviews of concerts and his piano playing, also organ playing, he was really a virtuoso. And when you adopt these few metronome marks we have, then indeed it's not so easy to play Franck, and you have to practice Franck, which was not really necessary before.
You're right.
Yeah, and also, sorry, I'm talking so much, but going on into this idea of virtuoso, you always hear this story, which I heard also, and I was studying, that, Franck, he couldn't play the pedals at all. So, especially not fast pedal passage. And by the way, he bought a pedal piano, so he was not able to play the pedals. But isn't that ridiculous? I mean, when a piano player buys a piano, is it because he doesn't play the piano? No, it's on the contrary. He's a pianist and he wants to play on good instrument. And that's also the reason why Franck bought this pedal piano. It was to improve his technique, of course, but he had technique.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. There are so many misunderstandings to my feeling. That, well, this, it's not scientific evidence, but when you put all the sources together during the lifetime of Franck, then the image is really different.
Exactly.
I don't say, but different, yeah.
Well, Joris, a lot of it has to do with the metronome, right? The metronome of the day. How we interpret and today, and how they interpret it in those days, right? So can you elaborate what changed in our perspective of the French metronome?
Yeah. So I think it's a general aspect of 20th century music, and especially after the 1930s, I think, that regarding to performance and regarding to tempo, musical interpretation became more and more strict as to the beat of a metronome. It's something which we don't see only in music, but also in architecture. You can see it in architecture, even surfaces, all the windows the same, square drawings, and so etc. So I think the 20th century has imposed this metronome very much upon us, and that starts, of course, in the conservatory when you learn music and note sight reading, etc. Solfège, we say, when we do reading of musical things. For instance, the metronome was absolutely a dictator. And for instance, pure musical things like accelerating when you make a crescendo and ritardando when you make a kind of diminuendo, those things were really forbidden in the second half of the 20th century. And that influenced very much of performances. What I find now in sources of the 19th century is exactly the opposite. There is not even thus far I didn't find any source that says that we have to stick to a metronomical tempo. On the contrary, the sources say the metronome is there to help us to find the proper tempo of a piece when we don't find it just like that. But the sources say at the same time, never use the metronome during the playing or the performance of a piece.
Right.
Never, because it makes the music mechanical and meaningless, expressionless. So I think this is a very, very important thing to know, that the metronome was used as an indication, but not as a mean to even not to practice. Well, from time to time they say, if you have a technical study, of course you can use the metronome. It improves stability, etc. But for the performance of music, it was absolutely unthinkable to use the metronome. And we have even more evidence about that. There are writers who say the metronome, you use it before you play a piece. You just start the metronome ticking the tempo, you stop it, and then you start playing the piece. So, by the way, I wrote some articles about it that will be available. Soon in English. So then you find more literature and evidence of all this. But it's really a different thing to use the metronome that way. And the flexibility, I must say, flexibility of the tempo is something I was not so much into 15 years ago. It's something it was a mistake of mine. So I really wanted, especially for Franck, to stick to this faster tempi throughout the whole piece. I think now that was a mistake. It should have been more flexible, but that doesn't change the basic pace of a piece. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that the tempo is what Franck wrote down as a tempo. Yeah. So, and it's basically way faster than the tradition, so to say. Yeah. Is that more or less some explanation to your question?
It makes sense, because when you, for example, take a piece like Finale, right? One of the most virtuosic pieces by Franck ever wrote, but ever written. Most of the organists, even in a wide majority cases, they play it in a moderate tempo, right? But Finale really in French tradition means almost like a toccata, right? Almost at least allegro, sort of like sortie, right? Sort of. And when you played this Finale in Sweden, I remember 16 years ago almost. That was like a real French Finale, right? Very virtuoso. It explains how Franck was really able, probably, to play that difficult and challenging pedal part, right? Because at that tempo is really challenging, right? So it was really a revelation.
Well, I think the Finale is a very good example, because at the same time we can learn and see how we should read a metronome mark and a tempo mark. So for the Finale, this, as far as I remember well, it's 100 for half note, and it says allegro maestoso. If I don't make a mistake, just like that, it says allegro. But allegro is the tempo, and when we look at other tempo indications, not only by Franck but also by other composers, for allegro, then 100 is just normal. It's just a normal tempo. And the second word, the maestoso, that's about how we should play it. It's not allegro con brio, for instance. It's not allegro giocoso or whatever. It is maestoso, and this maestoso has this impact on many things. For instance, in the central part, when we have the longer notes with the quarter notes and the half notes, if it's not maestoso, there are so many ways to play this, and ways which could even be a caricature of it. And that's something which I'm really convinced that is basic for Franck, especially for Franck, that there is a tempo indication at the beginning of a piece, a normal Italian term, and there's a second word, an adverb, that says how we should play this.
Exactly, like a character, right?
Character, exactly. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing with the opening of the Grand Pièce Symphonique, where it should be not in a very extravert way, this faster tempo, but still intimate, where not a caricature. And I'm thinking now, for instance, on the chords of the left hand. So you have da ba 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 da, yeah, the syncopes. If you play da ba 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 da ba ba ba, that's not the purpose of the opening, and that's why Franck says this. So it brings us much closer to the meaning of the music, I think, and especially since Franck's music is not at all church music; it's concert music. I think that's also a mistake that was made throughout the 20th century. I'm talking now about the 12 pieces, so to say. Of course, he has written also church music. I'm thinking of the pièces posthumes, and so on. But his major 12 pieces are concert pieces.
Exactly. So when you research the original French metronome, I think you found some indications that we misunderstood how we should read it, right? The markings of the metronome today. So,
well, yeah, please. Sorry.
So my question was, should we put the how to say this? Yeah, exactly. Below the number or above the number? That makes a lot of difference to the tempo.
It is very clear. It should be below the number.
Below. So like it would be faster.
Yeah. Like we normally do. You use. I mean, when you use. I'm still of that generation that used mechanical metronomes when studying. So we used this thing, and there was nobody who questioned this, that you should put the weight either above or under the metronome mark. So, and that I found this was proved by sources of the time, of the 19th century. So there is no question of putting the weight in a different way. So you put it under so that it is faster, so to say, but when you put it under the mark, you can check it with any clock. 120 is 120 and 60 is 60. When you don't do that, you don't have 60, but it's slower. And by the way, if you use very slow tempi or a very fast tempo, the weight drops off, or the weight the weight just avoids that the metronome will work properly. So there is no question about it. There is, on the other hand, this idea that sometimes we have a double click tempo or double tick tempo, whatever you call it, one tick or double tick. I think there are quite some reasons to accept that many composers in certain situations used a double tick interpretation of the metronome. So that complicates, of course, the story. From a theoretical point, it complicates the story, but not when you are facing the music and reading the music. Then this metronome indication is very clear. I mean, when we adopt a one tick and it is unplayable, then it's very clear it's a double tick. And then sometimes the double tick seems a bit slow for us. But then we have to look at the piece. What piece is it? And I have this example of a sonata by Lemmens, Jacques-Nicolas Lemmens, is not so much known up in the north, but in France and Belgium the name is still famous.
Of course.
So when he writes a pieces in a kind of new church style, which is serious, where fast tempi are not allowed and so on and so forth, then this feeling of the slower tempo is something from our time. And he wanted really to have this tempo. And a funny thing with those double tick tempi from time to time is that you don't have any problem when you use the double tick of putting together, of synchronizing all the parts of a piece. If you don't do so, you have to slow down so many times in order to make it audible even. Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting subject, and we have really to be very. I don't know. I would have that subtitle, but I mean, you have to be flexible in using the metronome, and to see what is the piece, what is the indication, and how can the indication help us. I think that's the best approach to it.
Yeah, that's right. And it depends on the music itself, right? We not only we read the indications and metronome markings, but we also try to read the music, what the music says, the character, the tonalities, the mode changes. And as you say, be flexible. And
basically, sorry to interrupt you, but basically we don't need a metronome mark. But from time to time, it's interesting to have metronome marks. And it's rarely that the metronome mark is really in conflict what you could imagine that piece should be. If you have the information about the meaning of the piece, that's very important, I think.
What about the slow pieces, like Prière, for example? I've heard you play also faster than usually people play in 20th century, for example. Do you think that the new understanding of, or original understanding of metronome also changes the idea we play slow pieces of Franck?
Well, we will play the slow piece a little bit faster than the tradition says to us, that the tradition was in the 20th century. But we have those metronome marks. And when in the Prière, Franck says andantino, it is a metronome mark which goes with all andantinos of
exactly.
that time.
Yeah. And andantino is not very slow. It's not
very slow, but is andantino slow? I don't think it's slow tempo.
No.
It's not adagio, it's not largo. Andantino is slightly going. It's even a bit faster than andante.
Exactly.
So that's perfectly logical.
Yeah.
So I think there it's again this influence of the 20th century, and I must say Catholic circles in organ playing that influenced very much this tempo matter. And we have some evidence also very clear in ideas by Vincent d'Indy and Charles-Marie Widor, who support very much this idea of Catholic music or music überhaupt being religious, sacred. And so the fast tempi are actually not allowed in this kind of music. We see also that Charles-Marie Widor is slowed down many tempi throughout the editions of his symphonies, just to match this idea of, like he says, that music is architecture like the cathedrals where you play it, and it must be calm and quiet. It must sound like eternity. And then, of course, a fast performance of the Prière, it's a bit a conflict with those ideas.
Yeah.
So I think everything has a meaning. When people react against fast tempi, there is something behind it, makes them react.
And this is of course the great tradition of Tournemire, right? Of people like Marcel Dupré playing, Franck also. We sort of respect those people, and if they say it should be this kind of tempo. We believe it, right? Or Marshall and others. They sort of are like demigods for us, right? And when you consult the sources and think about the metronome real meanings and look at what tempo indications are on the pieces in reality, then it becomes a little contradictory, right, with the tradition.
Exactly. So, and unfortunately, it's something in myself, which makes me not to accept a tradition because of the tradition.
Yeah.
And just when you look back to memories also of things, it's especially about tempo. To my feeling, it's very, very difficult to remember a tempo. When I try to remember when I was 15 or 20, 25 years old, to remember in what tempo a great master played a certain piece, I'm sorry, I'm unable.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
But we have those historical recordings, right, from those days.
Yeah.
The first LPs and other recordings, which really indicate how slow it was traditionally played. But then, of course, something changes, and people like you come along, and thanks to you, the entire organ world will be informed about maybe how Franck himself played his music.
Well, yeah, we will never know how he played it. But on the other hand, what you say about the first LPs, and so that is, of course, when this Franck tradition was really established. Unfortunately, we don't have, as far as I know, recordings of organ music from the early 20th century. But when we listen to other recordings of, piano music by Saint-Saëns, for instance, and I'm also thinking about Pierre Ney and a composer like Joseph Schongen. Maybe you play the music of organ music.
Yeah.
I don't hear any influence of this very serious and slow way of playing the music. We also should not forget that the 19th century it was not a black and white century. It was a century with many colors, and where everything was happening, and people still thought that everything was possible, where the speed was increasing really in a very exceptional way. In 1830, a train drove at 28 kilometers an hour maximum. By 1860, it was 100 kilometers an hour.
Right.
So that was really a period where this fascination for speed and so on lived very much. And I cannot imagine that it was not communicated to music and musicians. There are also a few pieces who refer to the trains and so on, but that's another thing. But the 19th century was a very positive century, and we think about it's romantic, poetic, and so on, but it was much of dynamic, and there was a lot of energy in the 19th century. Of course, we don't have all those documents. We have a few pictures, but they are, like I said, all black and white, but it was full of colors. We don't have movies, unfortunately, all those things, but when you read, for instance, it's really fun and interesting to read the Revue et Gazette Musicale de Paris.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fabulous what is happening all the time, how the reviews of the concerts are full of dynamics, and people are enthusiastic, or not at all, but then they write it in a very strong way. So I think the 19th century is not only, sacred music and soft music and everything a little bit rose and a little bit blue, but it's full of colors, and it's extravagant music and so on and so forth.
Wonderful, wonderful, Joris. And for example, besides the tempo issue, what else did you find in historical sources that you think we should be aware of in terms of performance practice?
Yeah. So one of my things is also that since all organists of the 19th century were pianists, all of them. They had their piano technique, and it's very difficult for me to accept that when they come from the piano to the organ, that they say, "Oh no, I play the organ, I will play totally different." As to style and interpretation, I cannot believe that. So that's one thing. And when we look at sources in piano technique at that time, I'm talking especially about how to be flexible in the different voices, especially of the two hands and the pedal. So this piano technique of shifting the right hand a little bit to the accents in the left hand, it works so well at the organ that I cannot imagine that people didn't use it. So for this I don't have any, so to say, scientific evidence. But we know that keyboard technique in those days was just like that.
Yeah.
We have an ex absurdo argument, maybe, which is again Charles-Marie Widor. He says that from now on, we are around 1900, he says from now on, it's clear that when notes are played by the hands and the feet, it should be all together. Why does he write that?
Because it wasn't a tradition right before.
I think so. And you have to try it out, especially in a melody. I mean, of course, it's about expressive passage.
Yeah.
It's not in scherzo, not in the finale. But when you have expression in a melody, to shift some notes, and is so important to make it expressive. And just listen to famous singers of the beginning of the 20th century. There you hear it, you still can hear it in old recordings, that they are not metronomical correct with accompaniment.
Yeah, and this is also revolutionary, right? Because as an organ student, for example, listening to this, probably 95% or 99% of good organ teachers out there probably emphasize the correct manner of depressing the keys and the pedals together, right? Always together. If it's a chord, you should press it together with all voices together, right? And that's how I was taught, and I would imagine you too.
Me too. I was taught like that.
Yeah.
But even like you mentioned, the chords, pressing the chords in a different way, not always all together, makes them much more expressive. And in this music, when you are going to make choices about interpretation, I will say, play it at the piano. And then you will find a solution. And once you have your vision at the piano, that means with the correct dynamics, which we don't have all the time at the organ, then you go to the organ. And you have to make your own opinion about the piece, especially as to dynamics and also the flexibility of tempo again. It's so different from what we are taught in, 25 years and 30 years ago, 50 years ago. It goes against that in a dramatic way.
Yes. We were taught that, the organ is very unforgiving in playing not together, right? Because the pipes would sound indefinitely, and the attack and release is very important. Therefore, you should depress it together. But when you imagine playing the music of Franck, especially expressive music, like cantabile, middle movement of A minor chorale, right? Especially. Then it does make sense to play it a little bit not together, right? To pay attention to the melody and how imagine like a soloist would be singing with the orchestra, probably, right?
Absolutely.
With the orchestra.
A singer, or even in an orchestra. So the 19th century is also the era of symphonic music.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine a hobo player in an orchestra playing his solo? The solo, let's say the middle part of the A minor chorale is hobo solo. That when he plays this solo, he pays attention to the moment that strings put the chords on the right time. He doesn't. I hope he doesn't.
Yeah.
The oboe player just plays like he wants. And it's something we should develop as organists, since we have this possibility of being at the same time the soloist with the oboe, the accompaniment with the strings, and the double basses, etc. So this is also, for me, a very important aspect of 19th century, that we should think, I'm talking now about France, Belgium, this music, it is symphonic music, but especially in the second half, but symphonic in the real meaning of playing together in an orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
And playing together doesn't mean that you play on the same beat all the time, but you make music together. And that's, to me, it's really, really very important. Also to understand why so-called simple music or cheap music by other composers like Salomé, Dubois, Lefebvre-Relly, and others, was so much appreciated in those days. In those days. It was because it was expressive music.
Yeah.
And the organist was just able to make expressive melodies. If you played this music just straight like you should do on an organ exam, it's just worthless. Mm-hmm. And I compare this very often to jazz musicians and the real book. If you play the real book just like it is written, it's just nothing.
It is.
And I think we need a kind of approach to this music, which is different from the 20th century approach. I mean, the written notes, the editions, that's our source, that's where we start from, and then we make some music out of this scores. And some composers like Franck, Vidor, they wrote down almost everything.
Yeah.
But the other composers probably not.
Yeah.
So it's,
you mentioned jazz, right? Jazz music, and it's really a fascinating comparison, right? If you write down the classical compositions of jazz players, improvisations, if you write it down, and many people do, and you give it to the student to play, and if he or she plays it exactly as written, it's lifeless, right? It's
exactly.
You have to. I think you have to add some swing. You have to add some feeling, some blues, right? And you cannot really put it into notation. That thing. The same is with organ music, probably also.
I think so. A mathematical notation for this music makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's different for other music, I think, especially for serial music of the 20th century. That's a different situation. But the notation of the music of the mid 19th century is something, which is also like literature or theater. Mm-hmm. An actor has a text, but when he reads this text, according to the rules of accents, etc., then it's just nothing. You have to add so many things, like expression, dynamics, changing tempo faster, slower, and so on and so forth. And that's, for me, it's really the key to enjoying music, and the key to music which communicates with the listener. Mm-hmm. I think there has been a time when mathematical performance made sense before the invention of MIDI, before the invention of computers playing music, etc. Then it was quite interesting to have also performances which were really mathematical, perfect, etc. But that's nowadays it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, any computer can do better than what we can do in this aspect. Mm-hmm. So we have to try to be musicians in the real sense of people communicating feelings, musical feelings to other people. Mm-hmm. And I'm really convinced it's not possible when you are playing in a mathematical way. It's just impossible.
Yes, and this is a big message to our listeners, right? Whoever is listening to our conversation, an organist, for example, and thinking, well, it's something really then makes a lot of problems for playing Franck's music, because then, for example, I have to learn not only the notes, right? Not only to put hand and feet together, or not together, as you say sometimes expressively, right? Not together. This is also strange for majority of organists. But you also need to think about the line, about the phrases, about the meaning of the idea of this piece, and make it alive, make it speak, right?
Yeah. So, but it's something which is actually accepted for other music, but I have the impression, although it's changing in a very good way now. I think the 20th century now is 50 years ago, and we are in a new era, and we are making progress. So, if we may call it progress, but we are changing a bit towards more conscious music and to be more convinced playing. I think that's so important that you don't say anything new, but I'm not at all. But I mean, a musician of today should be performing his music and should not try to imitate something, either a mathematical performance or another performer, like you mentioned with the jazz example of imitating solos by famous jazz players and so on. So that's for me the basic message, actually. And of course, we need to be informed. We have to know what we are doing. We have to know as much as we want, not as much as we can, because when we do so, we never practice, and that's not the purpose of the thing. But I mean, you must inform yourself a little bit. Then you can make some choices, and then your performance will be original and authentic at the same time. I think.
And to which extent rules of the harmony or keyboard harmony plays here also? Should organists be aware of the rules of harmony and voice leading in performance practice?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. When you're an organist, I mean, we have this possibility of two hands playing different sounds. We have the pedals and separate voice. I think we really need to be aware of the construction of a piece. We need this basic education to understand what is happening. I'm absolutely convinced about that. Yeah.
Because otherwise... Go ahead.
No, sorry, I don't say that other musicians don't need that, but I mean especially organists. But also because it's also a different situation as a professional musician playing in an orchestra or being an organist. I mean, it's basically a totally different situation.
Exactly.
We organists have to make our decisions all the time. Playing in an orchestra, you have to make your decisions, but in a way that you synchronize with the other musicians. And that's a totally different situation. And so when you are alone to make decisions, you need to be informed as much as you can, I think.
So if you are a soloist, like an organist, right, solo player, you're probably you're leading, right? Nobody is directing you. You are directing something in your mind, at least. And when you are a player in the orchestra, you're not a leader. You're a follower, right? You're a follower of the conductor.
Maybe follow. I don't like so much to say follow. It's rather it's teamwork.
Yes, it's teamwork. Yeah.
And as an organist, we are not used to teamwork. That's the basic
Right.
basic difference, I think. And that's why playing the organ is not always fun, because you're always alone. And this feeling of the teamwork needs also much education and technique and everything, musicality, but you use it in a different way. And I really didn't say that the one thing is better than the other, not at all. But I mean that the professional situation in performing, in practicing a piece is totally different. That's what I want to say. Although the music can be the same, but we have, as an organist, we have different purpose, different goal to reach than when you play in an ensemble or an orchestra, where you have this teamwork going towards a result, and that needs also much flexibility of the player, probably even more.
Right.
Yeah, and that needs also technique and training, and so. But I think there is a basic difference between the two situations.
True. So, Joris, I'm conscious of your time, and for our ending part of our conversation, could you direct us to a place where they can find your work online?
Well, I don't have a very well structured website, but anyway, I have one. And there are a few links, I think, to other websites. So if you just www and then my name, Joris Verdin, in one word.com, then you will find something about publications and things like that. Yeah.
That's great. I'll make sure I'll include this link into the description of this conversation, of course. And Joris, what are you working on right now, for example? What is your current project?
Well, actually, it's totally different. I'm working now on a program which combines organ and synthesizers.
Wonderful.
And actually, I've been doing this since more than 10 years, since the software was available on consumer levels.
Right.
I will play a concert with this combination early March in Acousticum in PTO.
In Sweden?
In Sweden, yes. And then afterwards I will do a similar thing also in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, in the Orgelpark. So that's a main occupation of mine now those days.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm so happy that you have this thorough historical knowledge and research also, but you also very clever composer, and you are expanding our understanding of what the contemporary organ music might be, right? So you're contributing to this field as well.
Well, I don't know, but I just like to do what makes pleasure to me, what makes me happy. So experimenting with combination of sounds, not new kinds of music, because I only use it when I compose things that already exist. I don't want to be original, or I do not have the pretension of being a composer changing organ music, not at all. But I think playing organ music and making organ music, composing organ music, it should give us pleasure, and it should give pleasure to the listener. And from time to time, you take a risk. You try something which maybe is not a good choice, or which is not so nice to hear, so good music. I don't know, but it's part of being a musician. You take some risks, and sometimes it works, and other times it doesn't work at all. But that's life.
But listen, Joris, isn't that what Cesar Franck did also? Took risks, also created music that sounded beautiful for himself and for the listeners also.
please don't compare me to Cesar Franck. I don't have to do. And I'm not even 1% of his talent and knowledge. I mean, I think every musician at his own level should do this.
Exactly.
And that makes it interesting and makes it just it's just thrilling to continue this way and never think, so that's it. I know how to do. I know what I should play. I think there's never an end to that.
Yeah, continue to improve, continue to expand your knowledge, right? And to continue to share it with the world.
Yes, exactly, indeed.
Thank you so much, Joris. This was a revelation to me, and I hope to our listeners too, an inspiration to expand our knowledge and to broaden our horizons.
Thank you, Vidas.
Please continue your work as you're doing this for many, many years. Have a great health and creativity, splendid and brave creativity.
Okay, Vidas, thank you.
If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog Secrets of Organ Playing at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pilkevičius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.